What up, y'all? This is Aaron Yara, and you're listening to the Effective Nerdcast, Episode 2. Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Aaron Yara, and today's topic is going to be getting started, or why getting started is the hardest part. As creators and as artists, getting the ball rolling can often be a very difficult part of the creative process. There's a lot of, or for a lot of people, there's a lot of anxiety that kind of revolves around starting a new project or dipping their toes into a new craft or a new art style. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. I have a few topics that I wanted to cover in regard to this, and hopefully, like this is a new project for me too, and something that I'm not really used to, as we kind of discussed on last episode. I'm not used to talking out loud or talking to myself. So I had a lot of these same feelings trying to get started with the podcast, as I'm sure a lot of you feel getting started with new projects. I felt the same way when I started the website. It took a long time for me to kind of work up the nerve to start putting my writing out there. Now I'm trying to put my voice out there, and I thought it was a good way to kind of kick off the first few episodes of the podcast, is just talking about how to get started creating. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is an excuse that we kind of give ourselves mentally to keep us from ever getting started, and that has to do with the fear of failure and how you can't really fail if you never start. So why take the risk and get started when there's a chance that you're going to fail, or a chance that it's not going to work out the way you want to. And really, anything or any project in your life that's worth it has some sort of risk in it. Everything you do every day has some sort of risk in it, and it's not really worth it to not start at all. Because if we thought that way about everything across our lives, we wouldn't do anything really, right? And I feel like that's the reason why people watch a lot of TV or play a lot of video games. They'll claim it's for relaxation, which for a lot of us, those entertainment things are. But for other people, there are entertainment consumption kind of thing is more of a way to escape having to put effort into their lives or into their creative projects. I don't know, kind of realizing that you have this excuse kind of in your head, or this resistance in your head, and trying to work around it is an important part of getting started on a new project. I always remind myself that, it's a lot easier once you get started, where the first time you do something, it can be a little scary, but then it gets easier and it gets easier and it gets easier. By the time you're a few steps into the project, you're probably gaining your confidence and it's becoming easier. I know it reminds me, I've been in bands my whole life, and when I was 16 or 15 and I was in my first band, the first few times that we played gigs, I would go up on stage and completely black out all of the lyrics to all of our songs. And sometimes it would happen like mid-song, or sometimes it would happen just at the beginning. And then luckily my guitar player at the time, he also knew all the lyrics, so he would step in and take over whenever that would happen. But it was definitely very clunky. But after we got a few shows in, that fear of failure kind of started to be less crippling, and I was able to perform consistently after that. I don't know, it's kind of funny looking back on it, but that's a really good example of how it can be really nerve-wracking when something is new to you or when a project is new to you, especially when you're showing it to other people or releasing it publicly. The second thing I wanted to talk about is uncovering the unknown. Because when you start into a new project, not only are there risks, but there are also just factors in general that you can't really account for, things that are going to pop up, or kind of obstacles that you either didn't have the foresight or you couldn't have the foresight, where they'll just come up and they'll, these challenges will stand in your way and you have to overcome them. So what you initially thought was going to be a really smooth project ends up being a little more rough than we had originally anticipated. And that fear of the unknown can be really crippling for creators and artists, where you can't take every factor into account before you get started, because it's impossible to see the future. It's impossible to see how your decisions are going to have these chain reactions that kind of interweave through everything. And I mean, if we had the foresight, then everybody would be successful, right? So that's kind of the drawback slash, it's kind of the beauty in creating, is having these challenges come up and navigating your way through them. The third thing I wanted to talk about is what I think is probably the biggest part of why people don't get started on projects, and that's the excuse of my skills aren't there yet, or I'm not good enough yet to actually work on a project. I'm not really sure where this mindset comes from. I think part of it has to do with like education, like the way we go to school and we think of like school as practice, or we think of, if you're part of, say, an activity in school, like you're in band and you have band practice all the time, and then once you're competent enough, you can go perform. Or that's kind of the way that school works in general, is that school is kind of like a really long stretch of practice, and then you have these people that tell you, okay, now you're good enough, or now you're competent enough, either through test scores or passing and failing. And I think it kind of, from the age of childhood, we kind of think of it as, we have someone else telling us when we're competent, and it doesn't really it doesn't really work like that outside of school, where if you're teaching yourself art or teaching yourself how to write better or how to run a website or making music, there's no one there to really tell you when you're competent enough. Let's start actually making stuff. And that can be really debilitating for a new creator, kind of finding that spot where they're confident enough to start the project, or kind of just having the feeling that you have the competency to actually release work. And we're never, as creators, we're never going to be perfect. We're humans. We have flaws. Any one aspect of creativity, whether it be drawing or music, or even breaking those down further, of playing an instrument or specific shading styles and drawing, each one of those things, you could spend your entire lifetime dedicated to it and you would never be 100% mastered in it. So putting out creative projects really is a collaboration between where you're at all these different skills, and you're never going to be perfect at one, let alone all of them. So striving for that mindset of, I'll start releasing work or I'll start working on creative projects when I'm perfect, that day's never going to come. So a lot of us, including myself, I've done this at times, we kind of keep ourselves from pursuing what we're really passionate about because we'll put ourselves in an infinite state of feeling like we're not good enough. There's also a thing that I'm not sure if there's actually like a scientific or psychological name for it, but I call it the experience loop, which I actually want to do an episode fully on this in the future. But it's where you work on a project and you get towards the end where you're ready to release it and show other people, and then you just scrap the whole thing. And the reason behind it is because while you worked on the project, you got better at your craft. So you say, oh, you look back on the project you just completed and you say, this isn't my best work. So then you start over. And then while you do that project, you get better, look back on it and say, this isn't my best work. And then you kind of get stuck in this infinite loop of doing a project, getting better, scrapping it, doing a project, getting better, scrapping it. And I did that when it comes to the website effectivenerd.com. I did that for so long. I have so many like scrapped blog posts. I have a podcast. So this is my second episode of releasing the podcast. I have podcast episodes I recorded 5+ years ago that I never released because I got better at talking. Well, not that much better, but I kept getting better every time I did it. So why would I put out subpar work when I'm a much better creator now? That's a really difficult mindset to get out of, at least in my case. I had a really hard time with it. And one thing to remember is that putting out the work and actually working through the criticism and the feedback and working through your feelings of showing your work to other people is practice in itself. Where, sure, while you work on a project and you haven't shown it to anybody, you've gotten better at the actual creative skills. Maybe like you became better at drawing, or you're a better musician now that you've written this song. But there's a whole other set of skills that come along with actually showing your work to other people and putting yourself out there and dealing with criticism and promoting yourself and marketing yourself, where if you never do that with any of your projects, you don't really you don't learn those skills. And when you are finally ready, it's gonna be harder for you to put things out because you don't have those other skills built up that only come post-production or post-release. And the other thing is, if you think about a lot of artists, a lot of people prefer their earlier work where it was a little bit more rough. If you think about take a band like Blink-182, say, where a lot of people, like, you have their self-titled album, or you have Take Off Your Pants and Jacket that came a lot later. But a lot of Blink-182 fans prefer the older kind of rougher style that they had on, like, say, Buddha or Cheshire Cat or Dude Ranch. You always hear people, especially in music, you always hear people say things like, oh, I like their first two albums, but then it got too commercial. Well, those later albums are when the band became more competent and more cleaned up and better at their craft. And a lot of people prefer the older kind of rougher kind of takes on their music, or the older style of the music. And it's kind of a silly concept, but don't deny your future audience that work. If you're not putting your rougher work out there, you're not gonna spawn any elitist people. Come on. You're not going to have those people that stick their nose up at your current work and say, oh, I like the old stuff, because you don't have any old stuff. But alright, I'm kind of off track. I just wanted to go on that little silly tangent. I like that. My first tip for getting started is to start small. And like I said previously, there are certain skills that you build after release, such as dealing with criticism or self-promotion. So having a bunch of small projects that you release will help you build up those skills. So say you want to make a comic book, you can put out 4-panel mini comics or comic strips for a while, just to kind of get your style down, kind of get the flow of releasing things down. Or like say you're a musician, instead of putting out your album, you put out one song at a time, or you put out, say, one music video at a time. And doing that will give you a lot of these little projects under your belt where you can have little wins and little losses, and you can kind of learn how to navigate through the process of creating and releasing work. And that's the other big topic about this is, as far as starting small versus starting big, is a lot of new creators want to make their masterpiece on the first try. We see it all the time. You have people who say, "Oh, I'm going to get into video game development and I'm going to make the next Dark Souls," or that was just the first game that came to my mind. I've been playing a lot of Dark Souls Remastered recently, but they they want to make this grand, huge thing. Not only are their skills probably not there yet, at the same time, a giant project like that is really hard to keep up with if you don't have a lot of other projects under your belt. One thing that you learn as you create more is that, you know, the bigger projects take a lot more effort, take a lot more time, and you have to focus on the same thing for so long where it's really easy to get burned out. And if you haven't developed the skills of how to deal with burnout or how to keep yourself focused for a long time, the project's probably never going to get done. Starting off with smaller projects kind of helps build you up to those bigger projects. And also, why would you want to put your why would you want to put your masterpiece out on the first try, where if you do have a few years of experience under your belt, your masterpiece later on is going to be so much better. The next thing I wanted to talk about is competitive environments. Now, in each field of creativity, whether it's visual art, comic books, music, game development, it can be really competitive, especially for newer or smaller creatives or creative teams, because you think of it like a pyramid where there's like very few wildly successful people at the top, and then as it goes further down there's more and more people at the lower skill levels. So when you're just getting started, it can be daunting to put yourself out into a world where, one, there's a lot of other people who are starting off and you're competing for the attention of others as far as like promotion and marketing goes. And then two, putting yourself out into a field where there's a few really big players and they're nearly impossible to compete with where you are at your current state. That can be a huge drawback. I've noticed a lot, like playing music my whole life. The hard Well, one thing that I notice is that like older bands in the scene will look down on the newer bands, kind of thing. It's kind of like that whole music elitism thing where, not, I mean, I guess not even in music, but a lot of scenes and a lot of niches want you to pay your dues before you're considered to actually be a member of the group. And that can be hard because there's some bullying in that from some people, and it just doesn't always feel good to have people not take you seriously until you're more established. But I mean, on one end, it does weed out people who aren't serious about their work, and if you have thick enough skin, you'll be able to get through it and, you know, go through the kind of small artist hazing that a lot of scenes and art cultures have. Not saying it's right or a good thing, but that's the way a lot of people act. On the flip side, there are a lot of bigger creators and artists that like to take newer artists under their wing as like a mentorship kind of thing. That's how in my first band, that's kind of how we started getting a lot of shows, is that an older band liked us and started booking us as their opener consistently. Like the flip side of the competitive creative environment is that you can use that as motivation, where a lot of people, you see people that are in your local scene or are kind of in your same area and they're being successful, it kind of helps you step your game up. I had a friend in high school where I asked him how I could get better at playing guitar, and his number one piece of advice was to always be playing with people who are better than you, because it kind of pushes you to get better. And that's something, even though he told that to me 20 years ago, and I haven't talked to him in probably like 15 years, but that one piece of advice really stuck with me throughout my life. Yeah, it's definitely true. You can kind of step your game up by surrounding yourself with people that you feel are more talented or creators who are more developed than yourself. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the number one piece of advice for getting started on a new project. This is going to sound stupid and it's going to sound silly, or I don't know, but that piece of advice is to just do it. This isn't just my thought on the topic. I've interviewed over, well, probably close to 100 people now for the website. And I ask everyone that I interview what their number one piece of advice is for people who want to start creating, whether, regardless of what type of craft it is. And the majority of the interview participants said, just get out there and start doing it. And that really is the best advice. You just have to get your feet wet. You just take the plunge. That's kind of weird. There's two kind of water-based thoughts about this, but just start doing it, start creating, start putting your work out there. No one's going to look back on your older work and be like, oh, this person sucked for a really long time, because most people suck for a really long time. And once you start to establish yourself and start to get comfortable releasing, anyone who's going to look back on your old work and be like, oh, look, they used to suck, that's not someone that you need as a fan or as part of your audience or someone you need buying your work. Surround yourself with positive, talented people and just start putting the work out. And that's really the best advice I can give on that. Alright, so that's all I wanted to talk about today on the subject of getting started. If you think that I missed anything, or if you have any other tips for getting started, or even if you're having trouble getting started and you kind of want to talk about it a little bit, you can always find me on social media at Effective Nerd. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everything at Effective Nerd. You can also email me at effectivenerd@gmail.com, and check out the website effectivenerd.com. You can find a lot of tips and tricks and different strategies that I've posted about, not just about getting started, but about different aspects of being creative or creating art or creating content. Alright, until next time, peace.